We're so excited to be here. The Lazarus Heist is an amazing podcast.
I started listening to The Lazarus Heist when it was first coming out during quarantine, and recently I began showing it to my mom. So when I found out there was a live event in New York City, I found it incredibly exciting.
That's the most fascinating story I have heard in so long.
I can't wait to see what a live podcast is like. I'd never been to one, and I was totally intrigued by The Lazarus Heist when I began listening to it in a binge fashion this week. So I'm all caught up.
What's up, New York? Thank you so much for being part of our live experience. Welcome to the Lazarus Heist, recorded live in New York. We are gathered here today in an intimate room with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out on the pedestrian traffic of downtown Manhattan. My name is Dessa. I'm a musician and a writer, and I host my own podcast called Deeply Human. And those of you who are already fans of the show know that the Lazarus Heist chronicles the story of an epic bank robbery, essentially, where North Korean hackers try to spirit away $1 billion from a Bangladeshi bank. And the officials, meanwhile, in Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, say this never happened. But as the hosts of the show follow the money, the listeners of the show are introduced to an increasingly intricate, like, spider web of mysteries. We hear about how the story runs through the underground gangster world of the Yakuza in Japan. We hear about the doxing of Hollywood A-listers. We hear about counterfeit money, counterfeit cigarettes, counterfeit Viagra, counterfeit birth control, which sounds like a really bad night. And before I ask how many of you have heard of the show and have listened to season 1 thus far, I have promised my British compatriots who are here that New York will make noise and that we don't have to urge you too much. So, ready? Don't make me look bad. What's up, New York? And one more time, just for style. What's up, New York? Can I ask now, how many people have listened to season 1 of The Lazarus Heist? How many people just like wandered in off the street and I don't know what was going on, but there were bright lights? Really? Honest too? Okay, fantastic. I am a fan of this podcast. I think anybody with an imagination is very likely to find something they dig. The true stories that are told in this thing are absolutely unfathomable. A lot of nods already from the audience. Thank you for being here for the taping of The Lazarus Heist from the BBC World Service. Okay. We have 2 guests this evening. One of them is a very brave defector from North Korea who can speak with first-person experience about what that part of her life and what that part of the world has been. The other is a cybersecurity expert who studies and hunts hackers for a living. But without further ado, I would like to welcome to stage the real stars of this show, Gene Lee and Jeff White.
Hello.
I'm gonna start with you, Gene, if I can. Few people will ever have an opportunity to visit North Korea. Can you tell us, in your experience, what that has been? And for those of you who aren't, as of yet, not familiar with Gene Lee's work, she was the first American to open a foreign bureau in Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. How long were you there in total?
So I started going to North Korea in 2008, and my last trip was in 2017, so over 9 years. The time that I was on the ground was 2011, 12, and 13, where I spent most of my time in North Korea.
And can you give us a little bit of your history as a journalist? Like, you speak Korean, yeah, to some extent?
So I was not the best. So I'm a second-generation Korean-American, and from our home state of Minnesota. Let's hear it from Minnesota. I'm sure we have some, yeah? So I did have to go to Korean school on Saturdays, but resented it. There are some people here who had to as well, was not a good student. But it did help me in the sense that I could certainly understand what was happening in North Korea. But I think I do tell the story in the podcast, but there was some idea that it would be better to send somebody who was not Korean into North Korea for that very reason, that being Korean and being able to understand Korean would make me less palatable to the North Koreans. But actually, I think being an ethnic Korean gave me a certain advantage in the sense that I didn't look like what they thought a stereotypical American would look like, right? So they looked at me and saw someone who looked familiar, not somebody who looked like one of these scary images from the propaganda. And but then my Korean was just bad enough that they were like, okay, we were worried that you might be a spy for South Korea, but your Korean is so bad. We're definitely not working for the South Koreans, but maybe the Americans.
And some of the people on your staff were North Korean, correct? Or the majority of people on staff?
Well, yeah, our staff was completely North Korean.
Okay.
Yeah, and one of them did not speak English, so I learned how to speak like a North Korean just so I could communicate with him.
And there was a few of like the features of daily life that you mentioned in the podcast that are so difficult to imagine for someone who is uninitiated. So you, for example, you mentioned listening in on some of the self-criticism sessions that your staff might have.
Well, I would often take my staff out of the country, and this was an incredible opportunity to expose them to the outside world. And it was also fascinating to see what they would do. What do they do when they're away from North Korea? And I was essentially their minder. And one of the things that happened, I'll tell you a story, is one of the times I did take them to see a protest in Thailand, because I wanted them to see what a protest was like, because they don't get to do that in North Korea. They actually loved it. They were pretending to be us. They were like getting down and taking pictures. And I'm like, oh, is that what we look like? We like sticking microphones in people's faces. And I know they enjoyed it, but then they did get together and say, how are we going to report this back? How are we going to explain this? And so I did see how, and we talk about that in season 1, how some of them explain how they kind of get around the surveillance, the reporting that they have to do on one another. But I would say also with the self-criticism sessions, I had to undergo them myself.
And okay, for someone who hasn't heard that term before, because I admit that in listening to the podcast, I had never heard the term, and my only frame of reference was like some Catholic schoolgirl stuff, where you went once a week to talk through a graded window to say what you did wrong.
Yeah.
What is a self-criticism session?
So something like that, but a million times worse, I'm sure, in some circumstances. But yeah, absolutely. It is almost like a confessional, and there's so many parallels to some elements of Christianity and North Korean culture. But I did find that while I was working there, I had to undergo those sessions as well. And so it was very insightful for me. It was difficult at first, and I started to enjoy it. Because once you understand, in a sense, once you understand what the purpose is, and it was also a way for my North Korean colleagues to protect themselves.
And it's interesting because I think in this, I don't know of another program where the subject matter experts who are partnered have skill sets that are so distinct. So, Jeff, you've spent your career researching and doing investigative reporting on all variety of cybercrime for a long time now. Can I ask, is this kind of cybercrime that occurs by North Korea allegedly, is that a special interest area for you? Why did you decide to focus on that?
Look, I'll be quite honest, North Korea is in a way a really bad example of cybercrime to look at, right? Because North Korea, for many reasons, some of which Jean's touched on, is absolutely unique in the world. And its cybercrime is absolutely unique. Other countries' government computer hackers, and let's face it, most countries, US included, UK included, have government hackers. Most of them do not do the kind of stuff North Korea's hackers are accused of doing. They're not going after money. They're not trying to hack into banks and being accused of all these other things. So North Korea is this really weird, idiosyncratic example. But what's fascinating is the journey that North Korea's hackers have been put on, according to the allegations against it, has led them into these really interesting alliances with not just organised cybercrime, but in some cases organised street-level crime. That confluence, that coming together of nation-state, very high-level hacking and organised crime is super fascinating. I think that's the trajectory other countries and other organized crime groups are going to go down, you're going to see this coming together, these very advanced groups with these very advanced crime groups. That's the trajectory. So in that way, North Korea is a really good example to look at. You get everything. You get the nation state stuff, which is really, really interesting and high level, and you get the organized crime stuff, which is also super interesting. And North Korea brings them both together in this fantastic nutshell.
In the show, you mentioned that cybercrime can be an especially valuable tool for what you called asymmetrical warfare. Can you describe what that means?
Yeah, exactly. So asymmetric warfare, and I'm not a military theorist, but as I understand it, it's if you're a smaller party in a conflict, what you're trying to do is look at the bigger, stronger adversary and work out how you can turn their strengths against them. It's sort of conflict judo from that perspective. And what I think North Korea, and they're not alone, have realised is that at the heart of these developed societies, we have a wellspring that we're all increasingly reliant on, which is the internet. If you can poison that well, you can do significant damage to your adversaries without ever having to put boots on the ground. Mm-hmm. And that's asymmetric warfare. The internet is perfect territory on which to fight that kind of guerrilla battle.
You mentioned that not every nation state engages in cyber warfare for the same reason, right? And part of what seems significant about the ideological motivations, but also the fiscal motivations of the North Korean hackers is what the money that they're hoping to get is earmarked for. Can you talk about how the nuclear program is related to the cyber activities?
Yeah, well, again, as you'll be familiar with in the podcast, North Korea has been largely sort of sealed off economically from the outside world. And so part of the accusation against North Korea's government hackers is they've been put on the send to get income for the country that the country can't get in other ways. They can't sell stuff like places like the US and the UK do. So you've got to get money in through the door somehow. So hacking it, the accusation goes, is one way that they're getting the money in. Now, what we do know about North Korea is that it's got a military-first policy. So the money, the resources, the attention goes to the military first. The obvious conclusion to that is that when North Korea brings in these, and it's believed to be billions of dollars through hacking now, that money goes on the military. It's certainly not being used to feed North Korea's 26 million inhabitants, who are a lot of them starving for food. And so it's going on these military resources. And one of the ways North Korea is trying to push its weight on the international stage and remain relevant and get attention is through developing, as we've seen, nuclear weapons and missiles. And so the assumption is that this money gets spent on that kind of material. I will say, and I'll just be quite honest about this, we do not have a sort of signed receipt from Kim Jong-un saying, thank you for the nuclear weapons, here's your payment in Bitcoin that we stole from X. But it's a fairly clear example that if you've got a country that spends money on military first and that money is hacking for cash, inevitably that money is going to go on those nuclear weapons programs and missile testing programs.
I'll just add one more thing, which is Kim Jong-un is laying the groundwork for something. And I see it in the North Korean movies and TV shows that he's trying to create a whole generation of young people, probably many generations, who see hacking as a way to defend and be patriotic to their country. You can see it so clearly that they're now being told your way to be patriotic and serve your country is through cyber, is through science and technology.
And that's not limited, is it, to North Korea? I mean, we're seeing that playing out in other places. There is, in the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we're starting to see, patriotic cyber attacks. You're starting to see that being used as a kind of, here's something you can do for your country. Russian cyber criminals at one point put out a video of a cartoon video of a cartoon of Vladimir Putin pinning medals on the chests of hackers that the hackers had created, their idea being we are hacking for Mother Russia. Certainly that was the hackers' view of it. So that idea of hacking as a sort of patriotic activity isn't limited to North Korea.
Now is the time where you guys get to ask a question. Hi, what's your name?
Hi, I'm Hannah. Thank you so much for being here, Jean and Jeff and Dessa. I wanted to ask about season 2 of the podcast and whether we might hear from any North Korean voices, and if so, whom?
Already, the first question is like spoiler alerts for season 2. Come on, we're trying to keep our powder up.
No, I think, it was very important throughout season 1 for me that we put a name and a face on who these hackers, as much as we could. And part of the reason I tell so many stories, I wasn't planning on telling stories myself, but I kind of serve as a proxy because we can't really get to North Korea. We haven't been able to get into North Korea. The border has been closed since January 2020 because of COVID, they say, but I think it's also just information control. So we can't get in. We can't get in. They can't come out. We can't speak to them. So in a way, I tell some of my experiences to serve as proxy, but we also spoke to so many amazing defectors who very bravely shared their stories and their insights and their experiences, and that will be the same. We have a whole new set of voices. For season 2, we're not going to divulge them. You'll just have to listen, subscribe and listen. But yeah, we're excited. We have new voices for season 2.
And after season 1 was shared in its entirety, did you get any response from the North Korean regime itself?
So after season 1, no, haven't heard a peep.
But in the lead up too, we got a response, didn't we?
Yeah, so one of the things it's very important for me as a journalist is to try to get an official response from, when I opened an office in North Korea, I came under so much criticism for working with a regime like North Korea, right, a repressive regime. But as a journalist, you always want to be able to try to at least get their response. And for me, of course, being in North Korea also meant that I got all the nuance of how things felt on the ground. But for season 1 as well, we crafted a letter that made it possible for them to respond, shall we say. And we did get a response from the North Korean ambassador to the UK. And he said it was all a farce, all fabrications. But I'm glad that we at least tried. Too many journalists don't even try to get the North Korean side or include the North Korean side because they just say, we can't. But it's worth trying.
I thought that was really impressive. I was really glad that you did that and we got that response. I mean, A, we do seek the response of the people that we're putting these accusations to, but B, I tried previously, having covered North Korean hacking before, to get a response from the North Koreans. I did email them, no response. So I thought, well, the North Korean embassy is in London, and it's this weird bit of West London. It's the embassy is in a sort of detached residential house on a residential street. So you get off the tube in this suburb of London and you're walking along and there's people, having barbecues and, driving in and out of work. And then there's the North Korean embassy. I thought, well, I'll just knock at the door then. That seems, you can't get to the door. There's sort of gates and there isn't a door. There's no door, there's no doorbell. And I thought, well, there's quite a low fence. Maybe I could hop it. And I just thought, no, that's really not a good idea. You don't want to become the news story yourself. What I did see in the driveway, there was 2 spanking new Mercedes. So clearly, I think the ambassador was at home, but wasn't going to answer the door to me.
But it's a shame in a way, because having spent so much time with that ambassador and with many North Koreans, they're very normal in so many ways. They are human beings. This is the side of the North Koreans that we don't get to see because we're here in the United States, and they are not that far away. They have a mission to the United Nations.
Towards that point, I think now would be a great time to hear from a voice from North Korea. But before I welcome our next guest to stage, I just want to play a little bit of a clip from episode 6 in season 1. That was the cyber slaves one. And in this clip, we're hearing our next guest explain what happened to her best friend after a high-ranking North Korean official, Jang Song-taek, fell out of favor with the regime.
She is a kind of model student, and lots of people, they watch lots of movies outside of the country, but because she's such a good, loyal, and model student, she didn't even watch these Korean dramas. She just followed all the rules published by the country.
But now her law-abiding friend has got a problem, because her father worked with Jang Song-taek. So after Jang's execution, her dad is now guilty by association, and therefore under investigation. One day, shortly after Jang's death, Seo-hun Lee and her friend are having lunch in the cafeteria, when a fellow North Korean who is head of their Dalian Youth League comes up to them.
He called my friend come to the dormitory. It was during the lunchtime. And so we thought maybe he wants to deliver some message to you. Who knows? Let's find out. And we went over there, and I saw the state security agent with him, and he was kind of forcefully asking her to go up to the room and pack up her stuff because she needed to go immediately. I can tell my friend was nervous. I was not allowed to come into the room. It only took less than 5 minutes, and she came out with a backpack, and then she just said to me, I will keep in touch with you later.
And the friend is hustled off. There's nothing So-hyun can do but wait. When she finally hears back, it's an ominous message from her roommate who's texting from the toilet of a highway rest area, and she says, I don't think I'll be coming back. My cell phone is going to be turned off now.
Will you please help me welcome Seohun Lee to stage? Thank you so much for joining us. May I ask some follow-up questions about the story we just heard? Do you have an update or have you received any news on the fate of your friend?
I only got to know that her father was executed immediately. There was no trial. And like her mom and her younger brother, and of course my friend, 3 of them were sent to political prison camp right after her father was executed. And then I tried to, whether they're alive or not, through my dad, but yeah, it was not successful.
Can you tell us a little bit about your story and how you've arrived here? And you were able to defect with your entire family, is that right?
Yes. So I would say like I'm a very rare case. So it was available for our entire family to defect all together because we are all living in China at the time. Starting from the like events that happened to my friend, which is like December 2013, and throughout the whole year until we left North Korea, October 2014, the like massive purge conducted in North Korea by Kim Jong-un. And then my dad, my brother, my mom, and I, all of us lost our friends, colleagues, and neighbors. And then when my dad openly asked us, what do you guys think about leaving the country? I was the one who supported him, like immediately respond him, yeah, I don't want to go back to North Korea. But my mom asked my dad, then what would happen to our relatives left behind in North Korea? So that was the moment, like we wanted to leave, but immediately we realized that consequences that our friends or relatives is gonna face in North Korea. So that was the moment we suffered from the like moral dilemma. And then we had the like long conversation, but at the end of the conversation, we still made up our decision to leave because we didn't make the decision just to save our lives. We wanted to do something to like bring the justice to the system. But as a North Korean citizen, there is nothing we could do. Even we are outside of North Korea because of the like strong surveillance. I mentioned this to other people too, but our homes are tapped 24/7. Of course, phones are tapped all the time. And even we are outside the country, in China, especially Chinese government and North Korea is pretty close. So there's a high chance they share the like informations and also monitoring us. So we had the conversation actually. We drove all the way from home and left our phones in our car and parked the car like away from the park. And then we walked in the center of the park and we had the conversation. So you can tell that even if you are in a free world, you are not actually free because just by the fact that you're North Korean. So
Yeah, in Pyongyang, if I ever had to have a conversation, we'd go to the parking lot. We'd have to go, and my North Korean staff would tell me, we have to go out to the parking lot. Yeah.
Do you feel safe here?
yes, I feel safe here in America. Yeah, but I mean that moral dilemma is still lingers in every like my family members, and then that's actually the motivation and then the like what drives us even working harder on these issues. I mean, we need to save our loved ones, and then we definitely want to see them again in our lifetime.
One thing I was going to ask about was the connectedness in North Korean society, because one of the things I found out that I didn't know was quite how interconnected everybody is. From when you're born into the local group, your local community group. When you start work, you have a work group that you're connected with. Quite small groups, sort of a few, 30 people, 40 people. And what you described with the consequences of you defecting and the worry that you had for the people you were connected to, even at higher levels of society, it sounds like everything's quite tightly connected. What you do has a real ramification for a family member and a friend. So all parts of North Korean society, everybody's sort of connected in these quite intimate, close bonds. Is that, have I understood that right? Or?
Let's say someone who approved that my dad's position in outside of the country, then he's gonna get the side effect from that fact that we are defected, because he personally proved that this person is loyal enough to be dispatched. So there is someone who always sign on your document that as a prover. And what I mean by that other people are gonna be in trouble is that those people who are related, not only because we have the close bond, it's just we are related because of the positions and work, and so those things.
It sounds a lot like human collateral for everyone, as the humans say. Can you describe a little bit, now that you've been here, what is your life like in the U.S.? You're studying, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Here in New
I'm
York?
studying. I just started my graduate school this year at Columbia SIPA.
And what are you studying?
I'm studying international affairs. So right after I resettled down in America, and then I volunteered for the human rights issues. And then the more I go deeper in this issue, the more I realized that the importance of the understanding international relations. Because when we defect North Korea, the solution was so clear to us. We just need to replace one person, then everything is going to be solved. But it's not that easy because of the all different self-interests of the countries surrounding North Korea. So I just wanted to equip myself with the better knowledges and then experience, and then find out the people who I can work with closely in these issues.
So I just want to point out that she's also going to be such a huge inspiration for other North Koreans who either defected or are thinking of defecting.
Yes, I mean, that was the another reason that I pushed myself really hard to apply for the good schools, and then I finally got it. But even if my financial situation was not somewhat good enough to afford those expensive courses, but the reason is that I want the North Korean people, especially those people who have the authority and power to bring changes inside of North Korea, I would say they are elites. I want them to see that they can thrive in this free world. I mean, as long as you work hard, study hard, better opportunities is gonna be available for you, better than what you have in North Korea as a privileged class. So
we've also got a question. We have received many from around the world, from listeners of the Lazarus Heist. Let us play one now from a listener named Carol.
Hello, my name is Carol Barrett, and I'm a listener in Prince Edward Island, Canada. At the moment, I have 126 podcasts in my podcast feed, and this is the best podcast I have ever listened to in my entire life. I was just blown away by this podcast. So first of all, thank you and congratulations for being the very best podcast I've ever listened to in my entire life.
Thanks, Carol.
And now onto my question. I want to know about the young boy that was in one episode and he defected. And I want to know if you have any updates from him, if you've heard from him. What can you tell us about him? And also, does he know what happened to his family?
Jean, can you remind us the story that Carol is referring to?
So I believe she's asking about Jung Yul-ri, who was this young we call him the math genius. And I remember this story when the news broke that a North Korean participant in the Olympiad had defected and was holed up in the South Korean embassy. I remember those news reports, and I remember thinking he's going to pop up in Seoul, and I hope I get a chance to speak to him. And
this
so
was the mathematical
Yeah.
Olympiad where they compete
Yeah.
in maths problems and stuff.
yeah, so he defected. He made that decision to defect during the Olympiad in Hong Kong, and is now in Seoul. He is a math student at Seoul National University, which is, okay, I don't know if there are any other Yonsei or Korea University graduates here, but I would say arguably considered to be the top university in South Korea. And I actually heard from one of his professors who said, "You interviewed my student," so he's doing very well.
Hey, that is great news.
Yeah.
And,
And as to the question about, so this is something I do want to discuss, which is, I do know how his family's doing, but I chose not to go there in the podcast. Often when you talk to North Koreans, there's a really painful story there and a really difficult decision that they've had to make, and to be respectful of that.
and all the more gratitude, legitimately.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And,
Sohyun, for real.
and this is a moment to say that every single person who spoke to us, it took an act of bravery to go public with that, right? And to share that. That story of defection is really difficult, and who they left behind. But I appreciate, Carol, I appreciate your curiosity, and I'm sure he appreciates that you've thought about what happened to his family.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Marco. Thank you for the fabulous podcast. I really enjoyed it. Really agree with Carol, what she said.
How many have you got on your list?
A lot.
126.
I can't count them. My question is a little bit related to this line in the head and what's the reality actually, but it's from a foreigner's perspective actually. So to Jean really. So as a foreigner in DPRK, you don't know what's the reality. I mean, you're taking to the supermarket, for example, that's relatively well stacked, and people are shopping there. You're taken to the subway, you're taken to different places, the park, you interact with the locals. Is that really real? Is that the reality? How did you manage to disentangle that, as a foreigner living there, of what's real, what's staged, what's there for your consumption as, staged by the government or the regime?
A lot of it is that's a great question, and a lot of it.
An acronym check, DPRK, for those of us who are rusty.
Yes, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So you clearly know something about it. So otherwise known as North Korea. So you'll often hear people say DPRK. So I would say that when you go to North Korea one time, two times, even three times, you are on a very highly orchestrated trip. They pull out all the stops to show the best side of North Korea that they possibly can. And I don't blame them for doing that, but you do not see all of North Korea, right? So it really took me many, 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 many trips. And I made many, many, many trips. And it's kind of like peeling an onion, where you have that outside, you keep peeling to get to what's real. But I can tell you that if you go there for 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, they can put on a show. But when you're there for 5 weeks at a time like I was, after a couple of weeks, they can't be bothered. And that's when you experience real life. And I always say sometimes say it's like peeking behind the curtain. For me, it was always like between the theater, because you have these set pieces, these moments where they put on the show, and then there's the time in between, and that's the real. So on every trip that I made sure to get to the countryside, see different parts of the country. I went to extreme lengths, actually, to make sure that I was having real conversations. I learned how to speak like a North Korean. I was going to tell the story, actually, which is that being from Minnesota, I grew up ice skating, and so my trick was to go to the skating rink that Kim Jong-un built. And if you don't know how to ice skate, and none of the North Koreans knew how to ice skate, you can't pretend, you can't do the theater. So that's when you can actually see them when they're natural. They were just falling all over the place and having a great time. And I'm not going to tell you exactly what I did, how I used that scenario, but you try to create moments like that where you get a little bit of a candid reaction out of people to see what they're like away from the theater.
I got to say, ice skating in North Korea is a hell of a good book title, Gene. Just saying.
At this moment, can you please help me thank Sohyun Lee for joining us on stage? Thank you so much for your story. And can you please help me welcome our very next guest? This is Michael Barnhart, a.k.a. Barney, to stage, our cybersecurity expert.
You had the eloquent one on now, and now you get the redneck. So I'm going to take it down a notch.
Thanks for joining us. So you work for a cybersecurity firm, Mandiant, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it accurate to characterize you as a hacker hunter?
I'm the ringleader of the Hacker Hunters. Got to step back 3 years. So went and joined Mandiant about 3 years ago. And on day one, we had set out, we were just going to take this one particular North Korean unit to task. And we got so much success out of it that we wanted to chase that feeling. And we kept going after the other ones. And we created a task force that I don't want to be cocky at all, but I think we might be the best in the world at kind of doing some of this stuff. Some of the accesses we're getting and some of the things that we're doing is it will never be disclosed, and no one will ever know about it. But it is stuff that you see on Tom Clancy type stuff, and it is it's amazing. And I have it's not me; it's a team of we have guys from all over the DoD and the intelligence community, and we've all banded together. And
the American Department of Defense, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
we
ma'am.
made a deal in the green room about acronyms.
Oh yes, yes, ma'am. So very sorry.
Also, we got to retire ma'am right now.
Okay.
Right.
That's that redneck in me.
Okay. So what does that actually look like in a day-to-day? I mean, are you sitting in front of, a half dozen computer monitors, all of them streaming code like Matrix style?
Kind of. Kind of. My pants are vibrating with my phone. We're getting new collect right now. The stuff it goes 24/7, and we're and it's all kind of a chess game too. The adversary is very difficult. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. We really adopted that Juki mindset from North Korea, where you're going to keep everything in house, everything. Juche. Oh, see, look, there's a redneck again. I've only seen it written. It's all about autonomy and keeping everything and doing everything yourself. And so we again adapt to the adversary, and we wanted to. We have our own linguist in house. We report in house. We collect. We model everything in house. We have our malware analysts. Targeters, trackers, people that have been in the business for decades. Because I'm not a North Korea guy by trade, so they had to catch me up on a lot of this stuff, along with this wonderful podcast that I am a big fan of as well.
Is there a signature or like a tell in the way that like a North Korean hacker, like the kind of code that would come out of North Korea? Is it like architecture or an accent with language where you could spot just by looking at the code, like, yo, that's North Korean made?
To a degree, everyone has their tells. They have their fingerprints. You have a certain type of malware. This group will use it. Again, this is a paranoid communist regime, so you might not see anyone else using it. But as things evolve, China has really taken the playbook is, hey, start sharing your malware and you can be better together. So you start seeing them kind of share things, but there's always a tell on that. We make sure we fingerprint them, we target them, and we have our blueprints. And whenever someone crosses our path that hits a certain amount of tripwires, I'm like, okay, this is most likely them. But for North Korea, they're a little bit easier with their targets.
Maybe a question for both Barney and Jeff, but how is it possible that in some lights, North Korea is just like cyber warfare powerhouse when there is so little digital infrastructure in North Korea? I mean, I think in the podcast it even mentioned like ideally only approximately like 300 people would have access to the internet if the regime had its druthers. So how is that happening?
They're outside the country, a lot of them are, and then they'll have to make sure to get that information back into the country by a set of proxies or however which way they want to do it. But China and Russia, you used to have them kind of along the borders, and some of the indictments kind of like exposed some of the places they were at in the hacker hotel. But that's still kind of going on, and you have to assume this too.
What's the just briefly in case we aren't familiar? What is the hacker hotel?
Well, this was the place. So as Barney's talked about, North Korea will often sort of forward deploy was the phrase Barney used. Send its hackers overseas. And obviously they've got to be based somewhere. And from what we know of it, a lot of the hackers, a lot of people generally who are sent from North Korea overseas are under the guidance of somebody who oversees them very, very carefully. They don't want these people running away, defecting, for example. So one useful way you can do this is you put them in a hostel or a dorm or you hire a place. And so with stories we've heard of sort of 20 or so young male hackers, all pushed in together in this one place, sleeping on kind of bunk beds, doing all of the hackers. And the Hacker Hotel was one specific place in China which is basically a North Korean-run hotel. And a lot of this cyber attacks got traced back to this one hotel.
The farther out from the capital, the less useful you are or important you are. You know, stuff hits the fan. You're on the North Korean border with China. I'm going to pull you back very quickly. And so you want to kind of keep them relatively close. But it is kind of funny, too, in how we've tracked some of these guys. And again, we work with several partners. And it's funny, you want to be good enough to be a cyber operator that can do good job, but you don't want to be so good that you're stuck inside North Korea. So they actually they like to tone down how good they are because they would rather stay overseas instead of being handheld in the capital, because even then you get a little more freedom, as you guys in the podcast have talked about.
So can you tell that they like being overseas?
Much more than inside North Korea. Yes.
It is clear from knowing you for like 27 minutes that this is a really big part of your life. I have it on good intelligence that you have a tattoo.
He's got a lot of tattoos.
I do, I do.
Just grabbing him.
I think you have a tattoo that relates to this gig. Now you have.
So he's pulling down his sock, and he's got.
What's that?
It's
what does
numbers.
it say?
1130 516 on your ankle.
The bottom is mine. The top one's their unit, the bottom is mine.
Okay, so there are 2 rows of numbers on the inside of your left ankle, immediately adjacent to that tender spot between the ankle bone and the Achilles heel.
Yes, ma'am.
You've got their number, you said, on the top row, and your number on the bottom. Who is them?
Wait, does
and who
anyone
are
here
you?
know?
Does
What that
anyone know who
means?
1130 is?
516?
So at Mandiant, we, again, whenever you get an actor, you get any type of activity, you have to classify it in an uncategorized cluster of activity, or an UNC. The number, Kim Suki is one of the cyber groups or APTs that we track, and we have about 27 different UNCs, and UNC 1130 is their number one UNC that you combine all the UNCs into a group, and then you nominate them, and you vote on them, and you try to lobby
Barney,
your
no.
way.
Okay,
Start it again. Start it again. Barney, look at me. Look at me, Barney.
I'm so sorry.
It's us.
And I told you I was going to do this. I'm very sorry.
Okay, we're going to do it again.
It's easy. You combine an UNC into a group and you've got an APT. I got that.
We'll just go that UNC 1130 is one of the ones that I have dealt with the most, and it's probably the driver of all the missions that we had. And as a publicity stunt, which publicity it has gotten, I put that on my ankle to try to get everyone as hyped up about this unit as I was. And then, which is funny because right after I got this, I then shattered this ankle on accident, or did I?
So wait, you didn't tell us who 1130 is.
UNC 1130 is Kim Suki. That is the APT or cyber group that is responsible for collecting all nuclear information and inter-Korean. We attribute them to a group within the Reconnaissance General Bureau, most likely the 5th Bureau, but
Okay, I'll translate North Korean hackers.
North Korean hackers, yeah. You try to put them. You'll never know, but their mission kind of aligns with a certain North Korean hacker group, and their whole point is to go after international relations. They go after journalists that are covering North Korea, specifically nuclear efforts, and definitely not the most skilled, but what they lack in sophistication, they definitely make up in volume.
This is an interesting thing. I mean, it does kind of come to an awkward point with this, which is, the podcast is called The Lazarus Heist. As you'll know, it's about the Lazarus Group, and we use the Lazarus Group as a convenient shorthand because it's got a sexy name. What Barney has hinted at there really is the fact that there was a multitude of groups within the North Korean government doing different hacks. And look, in the US and the UK, we've got different military units, intelligence agency units. We all give them, bizarre names. North Korea is no exception. But we use Lazarus Group as a sort of convenient, overarching journalistic shorthand. I just wanted to ask Barney, does that annoy you when we use Lazarus Group? And you go, no, it's also Kim Suki 1130 and APT 38.
It's funny that you mention that because Kim Suki is probably the only unit that's not a part of the Lazarus Group, which is funny. Lazarus has kind of got the coverall term for if it's coming out of North Korea, it's the Lazarus Group, and that's 9 times out of 10, you're probably pretty accurate with it. But we try to break things off into specific units. This unit does this. The Sony hack is a part of the Lazarus Group, and then the group that targets healthcare and for ransomware. That is the third member of that Lazarus Group. We're again all assessed, and they have a completely different mission, and they're there to go for missile technology, which again goes hand in hand with the overall mission.
And I've heard you talk about North Korea being sort of slept on as a cyber threat. Can you explain
100%.
that?
I think it's human nature to do something that you're good at, but North Korea is hard. You don't have your human intelligence assets that can get into the country. It's a closed off country. You don't have a lot of signals intelligence because there's not a lot of signal stuff going on there. I mean, there is, but it's just very, very difficult. And so what we've done, I believe, as an industry, cyber community, and, governments around the world, we're seeing that we'd rather just not deal with them. And they're not, in a lot of things that they're doing, they're not making enough noise to really garner a response a lot of times. But we're 14 to 16, 18 months away from having a nuclear-armed North Korea. And so the same way that everyone became a counterterrorism expert after 9/11, let's not be a North Korea expert after they have the weapon. Let's try to get after it now.
Yeah, this is just to say, I think we underestimated North Korea for a long time, right? It's a country that's cut off. Most of the people don't have internet. So in some ways, it was just, I think Sony Hack was really the first time that we became aware that they had invested so much. But really, this podcast was a chance for me to kind of pair what I was seeing with, I don't know anything about cyber. I still don't really. I don't know anything. I don't understand anything you're saying. But I do see that this is where they're spending a lot of their resources. And it means that this is where we should be doing a lot of work in the policy world as well, which is where I have one foot, and trying to understand, because we're one step behind. We need to try to get one step ahead. And I hope, and I absolutely love that so many people have listened to this podcast, because people are saying that audiences aren't interested in North Korea, but all of you and all the listeners have shown that if we can wrap up some of these difficult issues in a way that resonates, that we can get people interested, because I think it's absolutely important before it's too late. And I think we need some very threatening music right now. Because as you're saying, what you're saying is that in however many months, they're going to have amassed enough money to do something incredibly destabilizing.
And before we go to audience questions in just a moment, I think one question that's probably been planted deep in the terrified heart of most of us is, oh my gosh, how do I make sure that I personally don't get hacked? Jeff, can you talk a little bit about passwords?
Yeah, passwords.
Just a little bit.
What somebody described as the fart in the elevator, the thing that nobody really wants to deal with, but we're still hooked on them, we still use them, and it's step one in kind of cybersecurity. And actually, the stuff that Barney's talked about, high level as it is, you would not believe the number of times that cyber groups get lucky because of bad passwords, even though they're super, super skilled. Oh, I got the password right, great. I mean, computers are very good at guessing formats. So a very simple tip you can all use is put the number at the beginning. Bada boom, your password is instantly safer than a lot of other people's passwords. To go to your one, if it's automatically generated, so that's good because you can use a password generator, password program that will automatically generate you very, very long and complicated passwords. The problem is if the password manager gets hacked, then all of your eggs are in one very vulnerable basket. But look, that's, it's an assessment that you make. So that's the thing. So basically tweaking your passwords and having a different one for everything that you use, which again sounds like a ball ache, but you can use a similar password format and tweak it for each site. So you could use a FB for Facebook and a TW for Twitter and have a complicated password after that. It's a good tip anyway.
I do hope that the podcast scared people into thinking about clicking on links, using public Wi-Fi, because...
Clicking on links and also increasingly LinkedIn, social media. So the new tactic from North Korea and others is send you a LinkedIn message. Hey, Jeff, good job on the podcast. Do you want to speak at this conference? Here's the agenda. Open this document. Oh, and when you open the document, you often see that enable content button at the top. Microsoft Word or Excel, you'll open a document, it says enable content at the button. That's the internet's most dangerous button. If you click enable content, here's what happens. Your computer goes out to the internet, finds some code, brings it back to your computer, and executes the code. Do you know what code it is? No. Do you know where it's come from? No, Microsoft doesn't tell you. That's what the enable content button do. It's like, I don't remember Flash Gordon. You know that bit in Flash Gordon where he puts his hand in the tree and there's something in the tree and he gets bitten? It's like that. You're basically going out to the internet and just risking something. Please be careful with the enable content button. It's how so many of the victims got popped that we've talked about. I think that was the case in Sony. I think it was the case in Bangladesh Bank. Other victims that we've talked about. Please be careful with the enable content. If you only remember one thing from cybersecurity lesson tonight, the enable content button is not your friend.
Question here.
Thank you so much. I'm Michael. The UN panel of experts previously pointed out that the North Korean hackers are now collaborating with Eastern European organization crime groups. do you have any other idea about how the North Korean hackers are collaborating with other foreign crime groups or any, groups like?
I haven't seen. I think you're more specifically the Russian groups too, with the underground that's going on there. I haven't seen any overlaps with that. But whenever the cyber program is under, ultimately under Kim Jong Il, way back when, they were coming off those 1991 or the USSR falling, and you had those agents coming in from Russia to help train them. I haven't seen it, but I'm 100% positive it's happening.
It's interesting, yeah. It's a line we started looking at for season 2, and there's one story of collaboration between what was alleged North Korean computer hackers and a Russian organised cybercrime group on, I think it was a hack on a bank in Chile. It was complicated. It didn't quite line up, certainly not neatly enough to put it in the podcast, and that was the only example that we saw of that. What I will say, though, actually interestingly on the Eastern Europe connection, is that one of the hacks that we're talking about on a bank, the money is laundered through a couple of Eastern European countries. So basically the money gets hacked, stolen from the bank, deposited in what's called a drop account, which is a money laundering bank account, at banks in Bulgaria and Romania. Now, the money is then hacked, the North Korea's hacked is then in Eastern Europe somewhere. It's got to be pulled out that bank. So you've got to have some kind of contact there in Eastern Europe. So I think that's a really interesting angle of how did they end up with those banks in those countries being the ones that they were able to launder the money through. So there's a whole... But the problem with this is every time you get an answer to one question, it's like a Monopoly board. You just get one step further around the board, and then there's a whole bunch of other questions you've got to answer. So I'm hoping we can answer some of those questions in season 2 and square off some of those Eastern European connections. But even if we do, be prepared because you'll just have a whole bunch of other questions that will come up to you. Sorry.
Hi, my name's Stephanie, and this question is for Barney. As technology progresses, you see a lot of organizations going to the cloud. Question for you is, do you think they are more safe or less safe?
North Korea is on the cutting edge of everything. And the cloud and crypto and blockchain, specifically NFTs, are where we should be looking, 100%.
Okay, we're taking notes.
Yeah, season 3, yeah.
Okay, now we're going to turn our mic over to a 13-year-old caller who recorded a question. This is from Sam in Manchester.
In your podcast, you spoke about governments referring to viruses as weapons. So my question is, could cyber attacks be considered acts of war? And if so, could they spark international conflict where real people can be hurt? Also, how far away are we from a point where wars are fought online through viruses rather than in the real world? And how dangerous to ordinary people could that be?
Wow.
Good question, Sam.
2 for 2 unloaded.
Sam's got a job coming at Mandiant, I think. Yeah. It's a really interesting question, yeah. So, Sam, thanks for that question, really well put. To answer the first part of your question, the extent to which cyber war is war, yes, it absolutely is. Certainly in the US, the zones of conflict now include air, land, sea, space, and cyber. So an attack in cyberspace on the US is an attack in the same way an attack on, the US soil would be. So that's already, that's already established. However, cyber's an interesting one because if you put troops on the ground in the US, well, you're sparking a war at that stage. If you infect some government computers in the US and you do a bit of gentle spying, well, that's not quite putting boots on the ground, is it? The US wouldn't go and kind of bomb you for that. So the problem with cyberspace is it kind of straddles traditional espionage, which goes on all the time, we just kind of accept, but it also starts to move into kind of warfare. And there are some things that governments and countries do that are cyber attacks but have really serious consequences. We covered the WannaCry attack, you'll know in episode 10 of the podcast series 1. Now, the WannaCry cyber attack, again attributed to North Korea, went around the world, had some significant consequences, and affected significantly the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK. Emergency departments were closed in the UK. Ambulances were diverted. Now, there is no hard figure on whether people died actually as a result of that, but urgent cancer cases were rescheduled and those people suffered for longer than they needed to have done. So, Sam, to answer your question, will this have real effects? Does cyber have real effects on real people? Yes, it does. So we are moving into that. To push back against it, though, to put the other side quickly, we've obviously seen, again, the recent reinvasion of Ukraine by Russia. There was a lot of talk around the fact that there's been no cyber war. Where is the cyber war in Ukraine? Certainly we haven't seen, Sam, have we, Russia decide to take on Ukraine just by cyber means. They wanted boots on the ground. They wanted to possess that territory, was their ambition as far as a lot of people are concerned. So, we're not at the stage where wars are fought in cyberspace. We're still, we're still rooted in the earth. But cyber became an extra dimension to that. So, I mean, Barney, obviously your military background, you'll have an opinion on this, but I think that's how I'd sum it up.
I think you're spot on. I think, when every secondary objective for or some of the primary objectives for for certain North Korean cyber groups is to get money. So that's a financial crime. So law enforcement there. It's not a war. Espionage, everyone does it. Again, not warfare. But then you have, Andariel, one of the groups under the Lazarus umbrella, doing ransomware in hospitals, which is interesting only in the sense that they're only doing it kind of, assessed just to support their own selves, and that's not really to go back to the regime. But, when people start dying because you've ransomwared a hospital, which I think someone did, and I think there's actual lawsuits that are going to happen out of that, I think it is another loaded question. And I think that whenever you start getting to the point where you're going to start shutting down nuclear reactors and you're going to have mass fallout and many, many deaths, then we're going to start really kind of having to reclassify this. But really, I mean, cyber, we're still so brand new to it, and the policies and everything that people are still trying to catch up to it. And then again, North Korea has lived and operated and succeeded in that gray war zone. They want to walk up to, I want to do everything that'll get a response, but not quite an invasion. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to steal $100 million from you, and you're probably going to know it's me, but you're not going to know certain enough to invade. So, deal with it. So
that is tilled soil for season 2 of The Lazarus Heist from the BBC World Service. Thank you so much for joining us, Barney. Michael Brandt, can I get a round of applause? Also, thank you for the really, really intelligent, thoughtful questions. This has been a great evening. Now is the time where we're going to draw this show to the close. So will you please help me in thanking also Gene Lee and Jeff White, the phenomenal host and reporters of the podcast.
Sorry, just to chime in for a second. Lovely as that is, and basking in your admiration as we are, that's fantastic. There is a huge team of people who are behind this podcast, who we haven't managed to credit, and who for the moment will remain nameless, but there's an army of people at the BBC who work on this thing to polish it, make it sound good, make it legally right, structure the story, that lovely story you've unfolded. People helped with that. We have our producer for season 1, Estelle Doyle, who's here. Also, Viv Jones, our producer for season 2, doing a fantastic job. So I want to thank all the team at the BBC. I also want to thank Dessa for your fantastic job hosting tonight, and also the folks here at Green Space, and also all of you for coming along. So let's have a round of applause for the crew that surrounds us.
And, of course, I'd ask that if you haven't done so already, it is probably worth your time to follow or subscribe to The Lazarus Heist from the BBC World Service. Catch up on Season 1. If you got room in your podcast rotation, Deeply Human, bangs, I would also recommend that you follow that one.